We are now dealing with our last chapter, chapter 12. It's dealing with perfect, imperfect, present, future perfect. The letter to the Hebrews and the revelation of John. At the end of this assignment, you should be able to 1. Describe the backgrounds of each of these letters. Talk about the issues concerning the authorship of Hebrews and interpretation of Revelation. Secondly, summarize the major themes and theological points made in each letter. Thirdly, apply the truth from these books to your contemporary situation and to the future of your life. We should be having references to the letter, the Hebrews, then Revelation of John. Consider consulting Lion Handbook, the Bible, then Zondervan Handbook, the Bible. Introduction. It is probably appropriate to conclude our study of the New Testament with the 2 books, both of which look backwards and forwards, and that is Hebrews and Revelation of John, which at the beginning were referred to as apocalyptic literature or apocalypse. These books of the New Testament have raised more questions in the minds of contemporary readers than any others. Revelation especially has suffered more than a little from extremes in interpretation, yet each book has instructed generations of Christians seeking the truth. The 2 books give Jesus a position above all creation and the final authority over creation. The past, present, and future focus of each book build the life of the future church with a hope of rewards. We will look at these books as portraits of Jesus Christ. 1. Hebrews, or in Hebrews, Jesus is superior to all earthly leaders, including priests. He is God's Son in chapter 1 verse 2, High Priest chapter 4 verse 14, 8 and verse 1, is a sacrifice chapter 10 verse 10, and a complete revelation of God in chapter 1 verse 1. Then in Revelation of John, Jesus is first portrayed as the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. He is eternal, chapter 1 verse 8, then referred to as the Lamb, chapter 5 verse 6. Each author employs symbolic systems which we will need to understand historically, literally, and or figuratively. Each author delights in using contrasts to make his points. Both books were written long enough into the Christian era, and the authors note that their readers have lost their former zeal for Jesus Christ and are experiencing apathy or distraction. Finally, both books address similar questions. 1. What is my personal destiny? 2. How past, present, and future are put together for the Christian life. Thirdly, the overriding theme of the response in both books is optimistic. Our God is in charge. Hebrews. Some questions we need to ask and answer. Who wrote Hebrews, and when was it written? Is it a letter at all? If so, to whom is it addressed, and for what purposes? These questions continue to challenge readers of the New Testament, and ultimately, most scholars have tended to follow Origen, a 3rd century Christian theologian, who simply said that God knows. However, we can make some interesting observations by looking at the text. We begin by looking at Hebrews in outline. Addressing Jesus is greater than. Then we see Jesus is a greater high priest, like Melchizedek. Then he looks at the new covenant, sends exhortation to faith and endurance, then concluding exhortation. We have key verse, chapter 2, verse 12. It says, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." Purpose: it was written to present the sufficiency and superiority of Christ. Authorship: Hebrew lacks some of the characteristics we have known of the letters of the New Testament. It begins very abruptly, without conventional greetings and salutations, launching directly into theological discussions. Yet the closing passages resemble Paul's letters, with exhortations and personal details. Most scholars think that Paul was not the author of Hebrews, partly because the author appeals to apostolic authority as if it belonged to others. Historic figures from the period of the New Testament church have been suggested as the authors of this piece. For example, some suggest Barnabas because he was known to be a Levite and familiar with the temple, a major theme in the Hebrews. Others suggest Luke because the theme from Acts chapter 7, that God dwells not in the dwelling made by human hands, is also a major theme in Hebrews. Others suggest Silas because of Hebrews' similarity to 1 Peter, which Silas is connected to. Others suggest Apollos, Philip, Aquila, and even Priscilla, because if a woman wrote Hebrews, the anonymity of the letter is explained in regard to the feelings of Jewish people against women. Date and authorship or audience. Before the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD, because it is never mentioned. 2. Because of it, most scholars think that the book was written before the date. Also, the Hebrews were generally assumed to be a small group of Jewish Christians, well known to the author in Rome. Also, they were threatening to form some kind of Hebrew Christian splinter group, perhaps because they feared persecution as non-believers, non-Jewish people. Also, they resisted the increasing gentility of Christianity. But also, the letter can be read as an encouragement to their faith, while demonstrating how first century Christians understood the Old Testament and understood Jesus and faced their challenges. Note must be taken that we have mentioned that Hebrews is a book of contrasts, directing readers both back and forth. The texts take us backwards to the history of God's dealings with his people and forwards towards the final reality of the kingdom of God. And here below are the themes that demonstrate these characteristics. Christ is superior, is a high priest, sacrifice. Then it talks about maturity and faith, then endurance. Christ is supreme. Jesus' true identity is revealed with ultimate authority. He is greater than any religion, angels, and Jewish leaders, including Moses and Abraham, who were highly acclaimed among the Jews. He is the complete revelation of God, as we saw earlier, that he is the visible portrait of the invisible God. He alone can forgive sins. He has secured our forgiveness and salvation by his death on the cross. Through him we find peace and real meaning in life. No alternative or substitute for him. Thus, he becomes supreme. High priest. Jesus Christ links us with God in the order of the Old Testament priests who performed sacrifices before God. He is the only way to reach God. This is a Christian fundamental pillar of their faith. Because Christ was sinless, he became the perfect substitute for our sin, the perfect representation before God, or representative with God. He is the guarantee access to God, our Father, the intercessor for us to the Father.